Hello everybody, this is Pete from MyJewelryBench.com. Today we're going to go over this beautiful Bulova 1950s men's watch. It came in pretty scuffed up, dirty, gold worn off the case. The watch wasn't running. So we're going to go through and do a restoration on this, kind of replate the case, polish up the crystal, and get it running for the customer. If you're interested in having a vintage watch or a pocket watch serviced, go ahead to MyJewelryBench.com. Scroll down to where it says get a quote for repair, and you can go ahead and fill out the forms. There are 4 parts to that form. It's going to ask you about your contact information. It's going to ask you about your knowledge of the history of the watch and about when you want to have it serviced. It'll send me a message, and within a day or two I will try to get back to you as quick as possible. So let's go ahead and get started with this project. I apologize in advance. I did lose all the footage prior to reassembly of the watch, but I did cover some of the things that we're going to need to go over. Reassembly, plating the case, and moving forward with getting the watch serviced and timed. Let's go ahead and do it. So unfortunately, after losing my footage of the disassembly, we're just going to jump right into the reassembly of this watch. So you're going to see here I'm putting in the train. We'll start with the escapement wheel. And one thing I love about Bulova watches from the late 40s and probably early 60s, that time frame, is that all the pinions and jewels seat very well. There's nice tight fittings. There's very little play in the watch gears. Something happened in the late 60s and 70s, and the Bulova mechanical quality kind of dropped a little bit. And then towards the end of the 70s, they started using alternate movements and are now back to using their own as well as citizen movements currently. But here you can see I'm just putting in the train gears and getting those all set. Now we'll get to that bridge. This is the barrel bridge. Holds the mainspring barrel as well as the clutch system in place. We'll get that seated and then get the screws put in place. A lot of these Bulova watches, men's watches especially, they will run for a very long time, even if they get a little dirty. They're just really good watches. Bulova used very good springs. They lasted a good long time, very high quality mainsprings. And typically, it's kind of hard to kill them. Most of the time when I see a Bulova watch, more often than not, it's a lady's watch and it's water damaged, rusted. Most of the men's watches, they'll come in mostly dirty. So just keep that in mind. These watches are not waterproof. They're not even water resistant. So there's enough holes in the case that water will get into a watch of this era and destroy it. So you want to be cautious when you're wearing these watches. I'll hit the train bridge in place, and once the gears are seated correctly, I just test them and make sure the train turns without any errors, and now we'll seat the bridge with the screws. Pretty simple to do. There's 3 screws that hold this bridge in place. I did buff these up a little bit. You can see I've got a little bit of debris on them, but I'm going to go clean that out. And there is some pitting that you'll see on the watch crown. That actually ended up getting ultrasonic again. I did give it a bath. I did brush it off a little bit, but water damage is going to get on brass. It's going to corrode it a little bit. So here I'm just fixing after assembly. We've just got to make sure all these clicks and springs are seated correctly, and then I like to oil them just a little bit at a time. So here I'm just going to go through and oil all the set gears, all the jewels and pivot points, just a little bit at a time, 1 jewel at a time. Of course, through editing, this takes about 1/3 the time in the video as it does in real life. So according to the manufacturing specs, we oil everything at the jewel positions. And here you can see the little spacer for the ratchet gear. This gear here is the winding, it's the main winding gear. This is a reverse thread screw. You're going to get that in place. There's 3 parts of this, so don't lose that little spacer. Otherwise, you won't be able to get this to work correctly. And it's always a good idea just to turn the screw, just to seat it in the reverse manner, and then tighten it down. Of course, being reverse thread, we're going to go the opposite direction. And now we'll get the winding gear in place for the barrel. And once that's seated, We'll just twist it a little bit. Once it's seated, we can get the screw back into position. And you can see, kind of fumble around a little bit with these small parts, but once you get them seated, they're pretty good. And I'm just going to give this a quick little whine to make sure the train is moving free now that it's just about oiled. And onto the assembly of the pallet fork. Again, these parts are delicate, so please be very careful with the pallet fork and the balance. Once we get that seated incorrectly, then we can get the pallet bridge in place. And on most of these vintage watches from Bulova, you'll find that they seat very well, very easy. You don't have to mess around with the pallet forks like I do on a lot of newer ETA and Rolex watches. Once that bridge is in place, we can seat it down and tighten it with the screw and get that put into position. Remember, your screwdriver blade should be equal in length to the cut in the screw head. And now I'm just going to give this a little bit of oil. I'm going to oil the pivot points. I like to oil the pallet fork jewel. Those pallet jewels, they should have a little oil on them. I typically only oil one, and I let the oil kind of spread along the pallet fork. And here you can see I'm just going to lightly oil the upper, or this actually, in this case, it's the lower balance jewel. And we're going to get that seated in correctly. Put that balance bridge in and get that seated correctly. Now the whole balance assembly goes in relatively easy. Very good hairsprings. This watch luckily was in good shape. Had some major timing issues. I think that's just from wear. I was able to correct, and you can see once it gets seated, it'll take right off. And again, we'll tighten that balance bridge down with the balance screw there, the balance bridge screw. Now I'm just going to give this a little wind, and we're going to let this run a couple minutes and make sure that we have no problems with the movement. I also like to, at this point, I'll put it on the timing machine and I'll make any adjustments I need on the timing machine before I actually case the watch. Here you can see it running. It's running really good. Let's flip her over and start working on the opposite side. So the next thing we have to put in is the cannon pinion. The cannon pinion is the little gear. It's used for both setting and running. It holds the minute hand. Get that seated. It should snap into place. And I'm just going to loosen up the two dial screws. There's two on this particular model. Now I'll put the hour wheel on. And we'll seat the dial onto the watch movement. Once that's done, we'll tighten up and adjust any of the dial screws we need to make any changes to. In this case, I had to loosen a little bit to make sure that dial foot snapped into position, and we'll just tighten it down. And we'll move on to the second one. Okay, so this dial was kind of dirty. It wasn't terribly bad, but the cost of restoring dials has increased quite a bit in the last 10 years. You can see I'm just seating the second hand, and you'll notice that there's a big gap at the 6 o'clock position for the second hand. The dial being curved, you have to make sure that that second hand is going to spin around and not touch the dial as it approaches the north direction or pointing at the 12 o'clock position. So you can see the gap between the second hand and the dial will narrow down as it approaches. Make sure that there's no contact with the dial. So here's the case. The case was pretty worn out. The lugs, all four lugs had wear down to brass. There were some brass markings along the frame of, or the rim of the crystal along the watch. It is 14 karat gold plated. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a pen plate system, and we're going to plate this with some 14 karat gold plating. And I'm just going to, like I said, I just took my time and used the pen plating system instead of dipping the whole watch in. Now, I have previously polished this and cleaned it. It's very important that you polish to a very high sheen if you're going to use pen plating or any type of plating, so that the gold will kind of hold its sheen and reflection once you've plated it. So when performing gold plating, it's important to note the chemical composition if you have to pre-plate with nickel, or if you, for instance, have to do some kind of pre-plate plating procedure like acid dipping, washing. In this case, cleaning, polishing, cleaning again, making sure we had a nice buff on it was more than enough. The gold covers the brass very well. And you can see the crystal. This is primarily after I polished it. I did do some touch-up work to it because there were some deep scratches in there that I couldn't get out. Finding a crystal for this was not particularly easy. Every case is just slightly different. And a lot of times if you order a crystal that will fit onto a watch, you do have to make some modifications. Here we chose to use the original crystal. And I'm going to use some UV glue on the frame to seat the crystal onto the watch frame. The UV glue will cure in about 10 minutes under UV light. So once you put that crystal in, you just make sure it's in position, remove any excess if you do have excess, and be very careful with this glue because it gets everywhere. Once it's seated, then put it under a UV lamp for anywhere from 4 to 8 minutes, and that crystal is not going to come out. So there it is. I've got the crystal seated in position, and now we'll put the hands on while the crystal is curing. Of course, you start with the hour hand. I like to make sure that it's aiming at the 12 o'clock position, so we'll get that aligned as best we can and put the minute hand on next. This is a watch sent to me from a YouTube viewer, a subscriber. His name is Christopher. Chris, your watch it just runs beautiful. It may not look perfect, but it runs perfect. I think I got this watch set to, I think within 3 or 4 seconds per day, which was pretty good. Now, a lot of you have asked me what these little markings mean in the watch. Those are typically watchmaker marks. Some watchmakers will put codes in. Some watchmakers will use plain English. Some date watch repairs. Some don't date them. I tend to use my initials, what I did to the watch, in an abbreviated form or an elongated form, and I always date when I serviced a watch, because if I have to open this up again in a couple of years or somebody else wants to see what was done, they can go back by date and look at what I did. So there's the watch running with the hands on. We're just going to snap that cover back on there now that it's out of the UV box. And these watches snap together. Beautiful Bulova watch. This watch, like I said, runs very, very well. It sets and just keeps very nice time. I think Christopher's going to be happy. Let me know in the comment section what you think of this video, guys. I hope you did like it. Remember, if you want to get a quote on getting your watch done, serviced, repaired, restored, whatever, go to my website, myjewelrybench.com, and on the right-hand side, scroll down a little bit, and you'll see a request for quote, and I will be glad to do that. And here's the end result. Thanks for watching, guys. I do hope you are a subscriber, and if you're not, please hit that subscribe button. If you like this video, hit that like button, and I will talk to you all later. Have a wonderful day.